I mean, Michaela is academic, and I think, you know, the work we did with her, it was hard for her to translate into things that were more actionable for us. And so I think, like, it's very important to understand what's happening at that level, but then it's for folks who aren't, you know, trained in that way to interpret the information in that way. It's like very hard. So, I mean, I would say that's something I want to improve on going forward, is being able to translate the evaluation information more readily into recommendations and practice improvements that we can incorporate at the program level. And that's been a challenge. We have a lot of data, but it's hard to act on it always.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. We've mostly been talking to organizations that are definitely on the younger side of their collective evaluation. So it's really interesting to hear, you know, what 10 years later this might look like. It's a very different perspective.
Right. Well, and then too, it's like, you want to also, there's this term I'm looking for that is on the tip of my tongue, but, you know, like, when you've invested so much into something and then you don't want to, like, you become biased toward it because you've, like, invested so much in it already, right? You know, and like, what's that?
Sunk costs?
Yes, that's it. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, so, like, we've put so much into this, you know, it's hard to then be like, well, you know, maybe this isn't exactly what we need at this point. But that's why I feel like it is a really good time for us to reassess it, because one, there's more information and more tools and more resources that exist. So of course we should look at those and see if they inform what we're doing. And two, we've got our team is a lot of new perspectives. And so, like, bringing everybody into the conversation about, like, is this still what we want to know about the program and what's most important to us? So yeah, but yeah, it's easy to be like, well, the system's already set up in Qualtrics, so I got to keep getting that Qualtrics license because we're not going to reinvent it somewhere else. And, you know, it's, takes on a life of its own a little bit, right? And so you have to be willing to still, like, think critically about, like, if it's working for you or not, right? But anyway, I do think this next analysis will be hugely insightful because, again, the last formal analysis we didn't have that much data. And I do think, you know, prioritizing a product with this round that will hopefully be more meaningful to us as a program in terms of really thinking about, like, is this the data that we need right now? I think we'll lead naturally into that conversation about, is this the right system, or are there tweaks we would make, or, you know, or more wholesale changes to it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Keeping an eye on our time and looking at these last few questions. We still have a few to get through, so be good to move somewhat quickly on these. We have a question on what support the field of environmental education might be able to give you to kind of amplify the successes you talked about and reduce some of those barriers. Can you think of any types of support?
Well, I mean, I definitely think being aware of existing instruments and other models for collective evaluation is hugely helpful because, I mean, just, you know, being able to see what that looks like in different settings and maybe be able to apply some of that to our program is really important. And using existing instruments, I think, would be really helpful. And it would also let us put our data into a bigger context with others. So, like, we've been working on a after-school program that's, like, tangentially related to BWIT, in that it's still implementing MIWI types of activities. So, you know, a traditional MIWI is very much tied to traditional classroom time and traditional classroom curriculum. But obviously, like, you know, environmental education has many applications in out of school and after school settings. And we had a partnership with the Department of Education in 2017 to work with their 21st Century Community Learning Centers to do environmental education in these centers. And this was all under their, they have a STEM initiative where they work with different federal agencies to bring in those agencies' content expertise in STEM. So the Department of Ed funds NASA, IMLS, and the Park Service, as well as NOAA, to work with their grantees. So it's really kind of a cool, like, again, you know, the federal government working together, but, you know, Department of Ed has their grantees doing these great after-school programs, and then we have partners who are coming in and helping them do more STEM in different ways that are related to NOAA and related to BWIT through this MIWI approach. In 2017, we did a pilot, and there was a tool that we used, which was required by Ed, the Dimensions of Success tool, which was from the Pear Institute. And it's basically a set of 12 dimensions to assess the quality of a STEM activity. It's all observational, so you're trained to do observational data collection along these 12 dimensions, and then you score. And part of it was in some ways like not a great fit for the MIWI because you're not always doing every aspect of a meaningful watershed educational experience in every setting, right? So you don't necessarily bring in all of the pieces of that STEM, the whole STEM experience at a single time. So you have to take enough observations, I guess. But where I was going with this is it's cool in that this instrument has been around long enough that they have this national data set. So everyone who's a trained observer for the DOS tool reports their data into this data set, and we were able to compare, even though we had a relatively small sample in our pilot, we could then look at the national data set and see where, the activities we were funding compared to, and the national data set wasn't environmental education. It was just STEM, out of school time STEM, right? But one of the things we saw was that our projects did really significantly better in this relevance dimension, which was just like, they're doing activities that have connections to their community and their lives. And they're, meeting STEM professionals who are doing things in their community and like modeling careers that could be their careers, right? As opposed to, like an abstract physics experiment that doesn't, tie back easily to their day-to-day experience, right? And so we saw that as something like, oh, this environmental education place-based piece is potentially, making this aspect of the STEM experience richer. But it was great to be able to compare it with that national data set. And so I think to the extent that, if we have things like that for other types of environmental education programming, and this was part of the, I think, interest among, my colleagues in Chesapeake Bay, it's like, can we use this EE21 survey for some student data and be able to like look at this in the context of a bigger effort? I think, that's potentially really valuable. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I would say, making, raising awareness of existing tools and the effectiveness of those tools and different ways to use those tools and data sets that exist, I think would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that's really good information.
I think my understanding with the EE21 too is that like you can work with them to do some of the analysis as well. So that's kind of nice. Also, like given our use case where like, we're not able in-house to analyze everything, and we do anticipate working with a consultant on a semi-regular basis to do that. But every time we do that, it's a whole new project we have to spin up. Whereas if they have this like infrastructure in place and we can just say, hey, we've collected, this data with your instrument, and you can kind of plug and play, that would be hugely helpful.
Cool. So one last question. So you've talked about collaborating with some consultants on the earlier stage. Who are you collaborating with right now and in what ways?
Yeah, so we've worked with Anita off and on throughout the project in a consultant capacity. She's kind of had a bit of a career change. So I haven't worked with her too much recently, but